There's some species that can fall into multiple categories. When a lot of people think of small game in Tennessee, they think of squirrels, rabbits, and used to frequently northern bobwhite. But northern bobwhite is definitely an upland game bird, and since that was its own category, we won't include it here. There are also a lot of game species that we don't think of as traditional game species that some people hunt, but maybe a lot of people don't. They're not terribly common. Maybe they only pass through, they're only here for part of the year. So I'm going to include some species that we don't have here in West Tennessee, that we don't think of as game. Some of them might not be really game species here, but might be small. We have them here, but they could be game species in other states. So there's kind of a mishmash of a few different species. So we're going to start with a shorebird. And this is a species that you guys know is the butt of the joke, snipe hunting. Country kids take their cousin from the city out at night with a bag and a flashlight and say, okay, we'll herd a snipe to you, and they leave them out there. I had a really frustrating discussion with a woman on a plane once, who I don't even know how the discussion started, but she's like, yeah, somebody took me on a snipe hunt when I was a kid, and when she found out I was a wildlife person, it was the butt of that joke. And I said, yeah, I don't remember, it was something like, most people don't know that it really is a real species and that you really do hunt them. And she said, no, it's a joke. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's a joke, but it really is a species, and it really is a game. And I spent the next 30 minutes trying to, I don't know why, I was young and stupid, trying to convince her that it was real, and she didn't believe it. So a lot of people don't even know that this is a real species, and that it is a huntable species. We have them in Tennessee, mostly in the wintertime. They live in marshy habitats. Has anybody ever hunted a snipe? They're often a species that people might pick up on the way to hunt something else. Not a whole lot of people actually go in pursuit of snipe. But it's not a huge bird. They're polygamous. They have four eggs, and even though they're polygamous, wait a second. Yeah, male takes 2, female keeps 2. Don't know why. I'm gonna have to check on this. I don't remember what's the truth here. A polygamous species in which the male takes 2 of the eggs doesn't pass the sniff test to me. So let me get back to you on that one. Okay, I do not remember exactly this is the case here. But they are a species of marshes, unlike a woodcock, which is more of a forest dwelling, a swamp dwelling species. They're an early succession of wetlands. So they forage in the mud like a lot of shorebirds do for invertebrates and worms and plant material. They migrate, but they're here in the winter. Males perform a circular breeding flight as part of their courtship ritual. And that the sound that passes through their feathers is called winnowing. Winnowing. And this is a bird that a lot of, I hope you guys are familiar with, another shorebird called a woodcock. This is a forest-dwelling species. It too is migratory, so these are managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The woodcock is a fascinating bird in a lot of ways. Has a long, big beak that it probes in the soil for earthworms. It has a hinge on the end of the beak, so it can keep the beak closed but open the very tip of it to probe. It's an eastern continental species. We have it, some of them year-round here in West Tennessee. It's probably a much more common species to hunt farther north, up around Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Great Lakes states, where they're found often with ruffed grouse in regenerating aspen forests, aspen popple. People up there usually hunt them with bird dogs, often pointing, sometimes flushing bird dogs. And for some reason, there's a lot of dogs that don't like, a lot of retrieving dogs that don't like the taste of woodcock. Some dogs, no problem, they'll retrieve them readily. Others, I'll retrieve your grouse, but I will not retrieve your woodcock. And I don't know what that is or why that is. But Not too much bigger than a snipe. Polygamous, 4 eggs. A lot of shorebirds seem to have 4 eggs. Young forest, moist forest openings, and the males do, during their courtship display in an opening in a forest, an upward spiral, and then make a sound of bing, bing, bing sound. I can't do it very well, but they're known for that. This is a game species. Yeah, this is a rock dove pigeon. It's a non-native species, but it's done very well. It was introduced into Nova Scotia, northern Canada, in the late 1600s. Pigeons were, often kept in captivity. They were used for food. They were used for delivering messages because they had a strong sense of philopatry. If you raise them somewhere, you take them somewhere else, they'll go back to where they were raised. And since they're strong flyers, they were very good at this. So they've colonized the United States, part of Canada, all of South America. They've done very well. So it's a bigger bird. It's the columbiform, the doves and pigeons. They are monogamous. They form lifetime pair bonds. They have 2 eggs like mourning doves, but they'll lay multiple clutches each year. So they can have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 clutches a year. So they can be very fecund. Open agricultural areas, as urban areas, they do well on nesting on the sides of buildings and cliffs, and they're granivores, like most of the doves and pigeons are. There's no season and no limit on these, and although a lot of people think of them as kind of like flying rats in cities, in urban areas, they're eating corn just like ducks, and it's a clean bird. It's good meat. So not a bad table fare. Who's seen these before? More in recent years. Yeah, over the course of your lifetime, they've really expanded in West Tennessee. The Eurasian collared dove was introduced much more recently than the rock dove, and it was introduced south of us in the Caribbean region. About 20, 30 years ago, they were in the Gulf Coast and South Atlantic, and another little population on the California coast. Since then, they've expanded greatly, so there's a lot of them all over a good bit of the United States. Not quite as big or as fat as a rock dove, more slender. They too are monogamous. Again, 2 eggs, multiple clutches, ag land. It's an exotic game species. There's no limit in Tennessee. They're usually hunted during the dove season, but you got to be careful because they can be mistaken for a mourning dove. So if you think you're shooting one of these and you shoot a mourning dove out of season, you can get in trouble. But they were introduced in the Bahamas in the 1970s. And this is, of course, our native dove in the eastern United States, the mourning dove. And this is the most heavily harvested game species in the United States. A lot of people don't really think that. They think, well, the most popular game species is the white-tailed deer, but there's a lot more of these things harvested. They are year-round residents all over the lower 48 states and down into Mexico and up into Canada a bit. Very similar to the other columbiforms, 2 eggs, several clutches, lifetime monogamy. They like open agricultural areas. They're granivores. They eat grain. And over 20 million are harvested each year. So that's heavy harvest. Who's been dove hunting? A couple of you, 3 of you in the class. Average number of shells it takes to shoot a dove is 5 shells per dove for hunters.
I like to use practice.
Yeah, that's right. With practice, you get better. Yeah. A lot of people think of a coot, some people call them a water chicken, as a duck, but they're not. They're not in the same family. They are water birds, and coots are fun birds. The white beak, the red eye, the red spot, and those feet are just get the biggest kick out of their feet. Webbed toes instead of webbed feet. So here in Tennessee, we think of them as a winter resident, but in West Tennessee, they can be year-round residents, as well as a good bit of the southwestern United States. They form annual pair bonds. They're indeterminate clutch layers. That means they can have any number of eggs from 2 up to a dozen or so. Semi-open water, marshes, lakes, ponds, rivers. They're generalists, very opportunistic. So you can see them in places like Reelfoot eating plant and animal matter. Who has seen a gallinule before? Anybody?
Are those in South America?
Yeah.
Like on the Galapagos Islands?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Really? Very cool. The common or the purple? This is the common gallinule. It's black.
Yeah, I think I've seen that.
And the purple gallinule is kind of bluish purple. Yeah. Really a wild looking bird, right? With the yellow legs and the red on the top. The purple with the purple. They are summer residents of the eastern United States. So it's not a species that we typically see here in the wintertime. You know, on rare occasion we could, but it's not a species we think of as a game species in Tennessee. Decent sized bird for one of those cryptic marsh birds. They're monogamous, usually around half a dozen to 8 eggs. Marshes, and old timers used to call them common moorhens. Has anybody heard of that term, a moorhen? That's a gal. Okay. If you look in the Tennessee hunting regulations over the years, they typically group these together. Cranes, rails, and gallinules I'll often get put together. So this is a type of a rail called a sora, or sometimes a crake. It's a very cryptic bird. A lot of people have never seen them. Has anybody here ever seen a sora? Most people haven't, but a neat little bird of marshes. Here in Tennessee, they pass through, but typically their winter range is on the coast, and their summer range is north of us, but they do pass through Tennessee. So it's a medium-sized water bird. They're monogamous, indeterminate egg layers. They have an omnivorous diet, plant and animal matter, I've never seen one in Tennessee. Yeah. This is another type of a rail. Instead of that yellow beak, it's a little bit longer, orangish beak, called a Virginia rail. And we don't usually see them in Tennessee, but they can pass through. Like the others, it's more of a coastal species in the winter. The Gulf Coastal Plain and the South Atlantic coast is where we typically see them, but they do occasionally pass through the state. Similar in size to the crake, to the cora. They're monogamous, indeterminate egg layers. A lot of these species, they're going to be in emergent vegetation in marshes, so they're really well hidden in that vegetation. They eat a lot of insects and crustaceans, fish and frogs, and snakes. Okay, out of those cryptic, water birds, yeah.
Do you know why like gallinule soras and rails have such high limits? Because like their limits are 10 or 15 a day, but I've never seen them at all.
Right.
So,
I do not know why. I believe the reason why is because the chance that anybody's gonna get more than 1 or 2 is very, very low. And we think, gosh, there's hardly any here. Why would they allow such high harvest? Their numbers are doing great. They're just not here much. You go down to the coast, the coastal regions, and there'll be a lot of them. So the chance that we're not going to have an impact on our population. They could probably set the limit to 1/3 of that, and nobody would ever complain. But maybe they're thinking, if somebody ever did get into a bunch of them and they wanted to shoot a bunch, it's not going to hurt anything because that would be so rare. So let's go ahead and give them a high limit. That's just a guess, but it's a good question. Yeah. Okay, so out of the water birds and into the what order are we in?
Passeriformes.
Yeah, the Passeriformes. This is Tennessee's second largest songbird. What's our largest songbird? that we don't have it in West Tennessee? Looks real similar. Raven, yeah, common raven. We have ravens in East Tennessee. Yeah, a few. Little bit bigger bird, and a wedge-shaped tail rather than a fan-shaped tail. Yeah. So American crows, of course, are very common, and it's the only passeriform, only songbird that you can legally harvest in Tennessee. So as you know, they do very well everywhere except the desert Southwest, where you see a lot of ravens and not common crows. And they form lifetime pair bonds. They're generalists. We don't usually see them in extensive older forests because they are enemies of owls. And owls in forests will terrorize them at night. And during the daytime, you'll hear the crows terrorizing owls. They're common game species. People shoot them for fun. People usually don't eat them, although they're completely edible. And I've eaten them on numerous occasions. That would be something good for the game dinner. Yeah. And here's our legal amphibian. We don't often think of this, if any of the herpetofauna as game species, but the largest of our frogs, is it Rana catspiana, the bullfrog? Sure. Why not? Is a game species in Tennessee. It's native to the eastern United States, but it's been introduced to some of the western states where it's considered invasive and problematic in some places. They're polygamous and a little bit larger clutch size than most of these other birds we've been talking about. About 20,000 eggs. Swamps, ponds, lakes, other permanent water. They're generalists. They'll eat mammals, birds, fish, insects, amphibians, all sorts of stuff. And we typically hunt them, of course, when they're out in the summertime. So unlike most game species that we hunt in the fall and winter, we hunt this one in the summer because it's not available in the wintertime. You look confused.
Are you saying that bullfrogs eat mammals and birds and fish?
Mm-hmm.
What birds do they eat? Mammals.
Whenever they can fit in their mouth.
Mice, mice and shrews, small mammals that fall into or swimming across the water. They're very opportunistic. Yeah.
I know
I forgot to change the name. The 9-banded armadillo has been recently reclassified, and I think is it now called the Mexican free-tailed armadillo? Is that right? This happened a few months ago.
I know it's Dasypus mexicanus.
Dasypus mexicanus now. Yeah. Dr.
He
Dubois
still calls it a 9-banded.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I think 9-banded might be like a subspecies of the. I don't remember now, but anyway, the armadillo is a southern species whose range has been expanding northward for probably the past couple or more centuries, for a long time. So it can't necessarily say that it's expanding northward because of climate, but it's likely that climate is facilitating that northward expansion that it's been on. So it's been doing this for the past little while, and we expect it's going to keep on going northward. And that upper limit is kind of in question. It depends on how climate is going to change. So 12 to 22 pounds, they're monogamous. Did you guys know that armadillos have one egg that splits, the zygote splits into 4 identical quadruplets? I think if you've taken mammalogy, you know that, but it's kind of fascinating. They always have 4 young, they're identical young. Open woodlands, shrublands, agricultural areas. They mostly eat insects. They'll eat worms and grubs and invertebrates. It's not usually treated as a game species for sport. They are legal to hunt. They're usually trapped as a pest because people don't like that they dig around in their yards or in their agricultural areas. They are edible too. Some people say, they carry leprosy, but we often think of leprosy as a horrible disease because in the Bible, during Bible times it was. Today, leprosy is not a big deal. It's easily treated. You don't want to get it. But a lot of animals carry a lot of diseases, and with proper hand washing and proper cooking, those diseases are denatured if they have them at all. So it's no more an issue than the chance that you're going to harvest a rabbit that has tularemia or any number of mammals that have lots of things. Speaking of rabbits, let's talk about rabbits. Tennessee in the eastern mountains used to have snowshoe hare. The snowshoe hare would extend all the way down into the southern Appalachians in northern Georgia. We don't anymore, nor does northern Georgia. That range, that southern extension in the Appalachians has been retracting northward over the decades. I don't remember ever seeing one in Tennessee or hearing of them in Tennessee during my lifetime, but I know some old timers in East Tennessee who say, yeah, they remember in their lifetime seeing occasional snowshoe hares. So I think we've lost them recently. So 2 to 4 pounds, a decent sized rabbit. They're promiscuous. A lot of rabbits are promiscuous, and that's not a mating system term we see all the time. More often it's polygamous. 3 to 8 young. They can have multiple litters each year, 2 or 3 or 4 litters in a year. They like dense shrub layer of forests. So uneven age forests are really good rabbit habitat. They live in when they were in the southeast at high elevations in the mountains. The lagomorphs, the rabbits, have always been a really important part of the food base, along with small mammals, for a lot of predators. Females are often larger than the males in the rabbits. And rabbits, I think most of you know, practice coprophagy. They'll eat things like bark of young trees, which has a lot of cellulose, which a generalized digestive tract can't easily metabolize. So they will re-ingest those moist cecal pellets a second time and break down that cellulose and get the most out of it. Occasionally rabbits will practice cannibalism. They'll scavenge off of dead animals. So we often think of rabbits as cute little clover eaters, but they've got a lot of interesting adaptations going on. West of us, not in Tennessee, but in Arkansas, western Arkansas, you've got the black-tailed jackrabbit, another lagomorph that we don't see across this state. It's more of a, like I say, western species. And they can get pretty good size, 3 to 6 pounds, promiscuous, multiple litters per year, mixed shrub, grassland, grasses, forbs. So whereas a snowshoe hare is more of a forest-dwelling species, this is more of a shrubland and early successional species. It's a popular game species where it occurs in the West. Here in West Tennessee, we have a rabbit called the swamp rabbit. This is different than the marsh rabbit, okay? A marsh rabbit is south of us. I'll talk about it in a minute. We don't have it in Tennessee. But the swamp rabbit we do have in West Tennessee. Not middle, not east, only in West Tennessee, okay? It's a little bit bigger than the eastern cottontail typically, and it has a pretty small range in the southern United States between Texas and Arkansas, I'm sorry, in Tennessee. 3 to 6 pounds, promiscuous, multiple litters per year. They live in usually floodplain, bottomland hardwood forests, dense brushy thickets, so uneven age stands are really good for swamp rabbits. They eat wetland associated grasses and forbs. They're a popular game species for hunters where they occur. When biologists are doing research on swamp rabbits, they look for their presence in one particular place. Where do they look, and what are they looking for? They look on a log for droppings. Yeah. So swamp rabbits will often travel along logs in these flooded forests, and so that leave a lot of droppings. So that's a common surveying technique. Did you run across that in your work in Arkansas this last?
All the time.
All the time. Yeah. Okay. And of course, this is the rabbit that we have across Tennessee, the eastern cottontail. It's ubiquitous around the state. It declined a great deal in the 80s and 90s, around the same time that we were seeing a tremendous decline in northern bobwhite. But it seems to have made a little bit of a comeback. It's often found in association with bobwhite in very similar habitats, brushy, old field type habitats. It'll get into forests that have a dense understory. It'll use early succession, but it doesn't like a big old fescue monoculture too much. So I think they didn't respond well to fescue. There was some research that tall fescue, which the old tall fescue that was planted for decades and decades, has an endophyte associated with it that can cause reproductive problems in several species of mammals, both domestic and wild mammals. We think that it was causing reproductive problems with rabbits, and that's speculation. One of the reasons why rabbit populations were declining is we were putting out more and more fescue. But the new fescue that they put out these days typically is endophyte free, so that's good, but it's still not great having a monoculture of fescue. They like more diverse vegetative systems.
I know something that rabbits like a lot is lamb's ear, the plant.
Okay.
Do people ever plant that, if you know what I'm talking about?
I've never, okay, is what you're talking about, lamb's ear is planted in gardens, in ornamental and herb gardens, but what we often see growing out in the wild looks like lamb's ear, but it's called mullein. It's a little bit different.
Okay.
And that's not usually planted, but it's a European common.
Yeah, there was a bunch at the ranch one day for something, like our property owner has a bunch in some of the fields.
Okay,
So I was
okay.
looking at it.
I don't know of anybody ever planting it, but rabbits will eat all sorts of stuff, you know, so just a diversity of native vegetation will be good.
I guess like, 'cause my grandparents always had problems with them, that they just had mullein growing wild, that the rabbits would always target that in their yards. I didn't know if people would
Interesting,
specifically
yeah.
plant that or not.
I've never heard of that. Good question. So again, an eastern species that drops all the way down into northern South America. So pretty common species. Average rabbit weight 2 to 4 pounds, promiscuous, multiple litters per year. Meadows, shrubby areas, forest edges. They eat a wide variety of vegetation. The nest with young is called a form, rabbit form, and the young are called kits, for what that's worth. In the Appalachians, just as we had the snowshoe hare, we also have the Appalachian cottontail. And as you go farther north in the Appalachians into the New England states, there's the New England cottontail. Okay, but the Appalachian cottontail is I might have seen some, but I wasn't sure if they were an Appalachian cottontail or an Eastern cottontail. Appalachian cottontail has a little bit of a black spot right there that's often considered by biologists a good sign that that's what that is. So see that just little bitty black mark right there is a sign of an Appalachian cottontail. Very limited range in the Appalachians, kind of scattered out throughout that range. They're promiscuous. They're a smaller rabbit, 1.5 to 2.5 pounds. Several litters per year. They're in dense mountain habitats such as mountain laurel and rhododendron thickets. Vicinium is like blueberry and stuff like that. Other dense cover like farkleberry. They're high elevation in clearings on mountain balds. Are you guys familiar with bald habitat in the Appalachian Mountains? Our Appalachians, the eastern mountains, don't get tall enough to have alpine. That means it's just too high physiologically for trees to grow. But we do have some mountaintops or ridge tops that are bare of trees, and they have meadow vegetation, grasses and forbs and shrubs. And there's a lot of speculation and research on why. Is it mammals grazed them off? Lightning was always striking the highest points and causing fires. Native Americans would have fires there, but those mountain meadows have a lot of diversity of wildlife, and those rabbits really like those areas too. This is the little weird looking marsh rabbit that's farther down south, like down in the Gulf coastal plain. And we do not have the marsh rabbit in Tennessee, but it's on both all over Florida and on both the Atlantic seaboard as well as the Gulf coastal plain. The small rabbit, just 2 to 3.5 pounds, promiscuous. similar young to the other species of rabbits, but they're often found in kind of brackish habitats, salt marsh habitats. They're adapted to those kind of brackish or saline systems where they feed on a lot of those types of plants. They have shorter legs, shorter ears than the eastern cottontail. So just really short, stubby ears. Okay. A lot of people think of this species as a varmint, much like a beaver, and I would argue that much like a beaver, this is a really valuable species in an ecosystem. It is a keystone species, and it's what makes it valuable is what people don't like about it. It makes burrows. It makes burrows an early successional habitat, and that's great because those burrows are used by very many other species. It's bad because anybody who has livestock hates the fact that there's now a hole that their horse or their cow can step in and break a leg or something like that. So people kill these things on site just because they think of them as a varmint. But from a wildlife and an ecosystem perspective, they're very valuable. So they range widely across the eastern United States and all the way across Canada and up into Alaska. So they have a pretty wide range. 4 to 9 pounds, up to 30 pounds. I'd like to see a 30-pound woodchuck. They form annual pair bonds, 2 to 6 young, early successional habitats. They eat grasses and a lot of forbs, and I like them. Groundhog, woodchuck, same thing. Whistle pig. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Marmota monax, that's it. That's right. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into the rodents, the squirrels. The gray squirrel is ubiquitous across Tennessee, very common and popular game species. One of the first 2 species that's allowed that can be legally hunted each fall in Tennessee. What's the other one? Early hunting season. There's gray and fox squirrel and mourning dove. Yeah, real early. Oh, there's a couple others too. Those are the common. So it's all across the eastern United States, not in the western United States. They weigh 1 to 2 pounds. They're promiscuous. There's actually a lot of controversy in the literature about whether they're promiscuous or polygamous, but both have been observed. 2 to 6 young, a couple litters a year. They live in mature hardwood forests. In the wintertime, of course, they're specialists on hardmass, on nuts. They will hide nuts. They will hoard nuts, but not all in one place. So, like a chipmunk will put all their nuts in one spot. But these guys and fox squirrels put a nut here, nut here, and nut here. And the term for that is a scatter hoarder. The term for a chipmunk that puts all their nuts in one place is a larder hoarder. And what do you imagine is the value of a scatter hoarder?
Plant trees.
Yeah, they're helping reestablish the next generation of forest for us. So that's pretty cool thing they do. And they have an amazing ability to sound like a deer when they're talking to the woods, right? Yeah. And then a much larger fox squirrel that we also have in Tennessee. This species is bigger, and it usually occupies more edge habitat. We see it more at forest edges. We'll see these get out into fields and use early successional habitats for foraging at times. They also, eat nuts and are specialists during the winter, but in the summer, they're not so much in the interior forest. Another neat thing about fox squirrels, we don't see it as much in Tennessee, but you see a fair bit of color variation. You see a lot of melanism or partial melanism. A lot of fox squirrels, I see this more in the south of us in some of the southern states, that have black heads or black faces or are all black, completely melanistic. Has anybody seen that in fox squirrels before?
Seen it in Michigan like that.
In Michigan, yeah. And you see also some white on the face sometimes and that sort of thing. So some really neat color variation. Another eastern species like the gray squirrel. So where you see one, you often see the other at the edge. These guys tend to be monogamous. So unlike the gray squirrels, which tend to be more promiscuous. So 2 to 3 young, couple breeding periods a year, just like the gray squirrel. Hardwoods, hardwood pine, edges, They too are scatter hoarders, just like the gray squirrel. Now, when a lot of people see a fox squirrel, they call it a red squirrel. But a red squirrel is different, okay? This is a red squirrel, and we do not have them in West or Middle Tennessee. They're only in East Tennessee. They live in pine forests, pine-dominated forests. There's several species of these that are often collectively called, well, sometimes they're collectively called red squirrels, sometimes they're collectively called pine squirrels, okay? But we see these across different species of them across the United States, including the western United States. I had them on my study area in Oregon, all the way up into Alaska. So much more widely distributed across the continent than the gray and the fox squirrel. They're promiscuous, they're smaller, they're a good bit smaller, usually 4 to 5 young. They might produce 1 or 2 litters per year. Conifer forest, they eat seeds, pine seeds. This is a common food of the threatened spotted owl in the western states. They are a game species. Sometimes they're called, old timers call them chickarees, and that is supposed to be some sort of describe the call or the sound they make. I don't know how that works, but it's supposed to. Yeah, 1 of 3 species of pine squirrel. Oh, I thought I had more. Okay, all right. Good, we made good time. Let's get out of here. Okay, any questions for me?